In episode 3, Julian and Vera roll up to the house and they're discussing the whole Leanne situation. They're both pretty convinced that Jericho is actually Leanne's child. Vera does have some expertise in this department because she's a recovering addict who actually had a child and her mother took the child away from her. She tells Julian, the best thing my mother ever did was not let me hold my baby in the hospital, but with Leanne, she's right here watching another woman raise her kid. I mean, what happens if she just decides one day to pack up and leave? Dorothy's going to be looking for Jericho seemingly forever. That's something that Julian hadn't even thought of. He walks in the house and Dorothy is walking out. She's going to a Marilyn Monroe look-alike contest. Sean is in the kitchen getting ready to take Jericho and Leanne to the park. Even though she couldn't make it down the block earlier, Sean thinks she's ready. They're making progress, and before you know it, they'll just be a normal family. Julian then walks up to Sean and tells him, hey, I think we should get Jericho and Leanne's DNA tested. We should probably know for sure if that is indeed Leanne's child. Because if not, then we need to get some adoption proceedings started. The conversation, however, gets interrupted when Leanne walks in the room. A short while later, Sean, Jericho, and Leanne head off to the park, and Leanne is in fact doing better. That doesn't mean, however, her head isn't on a swivel looking at every single person as a possible suspect. To get her mind off things, Sean starts showing her flowers in the park that are actually edible. It does work for a little bit until a homeless teen comes up and asks Sean for change. And Leanne doesn't feel comfortable with the fact that Sean let this person so close to the baby stroller. After that, she no longer wants to stay in the park and they go back home. Dorothy comes home that night, starts ranting and raving about the fact that her job made her go to that stupid Marilyn Monroe contest, and the group heads off to bed. The next day, Julian calls an old friend and meets him in the park. Roscoe. Roscoe has not been doing well. He hasn't been sleeping well. Him and his wife are getting in fights, but Julian honestly doesn't care. He tells Roscoe that he needs him to get Leanne and Jericho's DNA, but Roscoe doesn't want any part of it. He's done. Julian is able to convince him to help out one last time, and Roscoe does know somebody who works in a lab who owes him a favor. So he offers to be a conduit, but he's not going to go in that house and get the DNA. He's going to make Julian do that. As they're wrapping up the conversation, that homeless teen that came up to Sean walks by and catches the eye of both of them. But they just go back to working out. The homeless teen is also in the mind of Sean, who decides to make the kids pizza because they looked really hungry. He heads out to the park, which is literally right behind their house, and he kind of befriends the kids. They just look like troubled youths, and they do enjoy the pizza. But as Sean was feeding the youth of America, Roscoe FaceTimes Julian from a hospital. Roscoe's just visiting a relative. But he tells Julian, I need that DNA now. The guy I know is willing to help out, but he needs it today. It forces Julian to go into the house and sneak around, trying to find any strands of Leanne's hair, but he's coming up empty. As he's looking under her bed, he ends up getting caught by her. He doesn't really have a good excuse as to what he's doing there, so he just says, last week when we were fooling around, I thought I dropped my watch. The issue is, he's actually wearing the watch. That's when he starts lying to Leanne, telling her how he misses her, getting close to her and kissing her, all the while putting his hands through her hair until eventually he just pulls some strands out. It upsets Leanne, and he apologizes for, quote, getting a little too carried away. Julian was unable to get enough hair, actually, to make a DNA sample. He FaceTimes Vera because he's kind of freaking out a little bit. He doesn't know what to do. Vera's suggestion is to grab some of Dorothy's hair. But Julian reminds her the whole point is to prove that it's not Leanne's child. Vera also brings up the point that they probably should confront Dorothy about this because nothing's going to change until she faces the truth. But Julian gets distracted when he sees a text from Roscoe saying, I'm here. He needs to act quickly, so he starts looking around the house for any strands of Dorothy's hair. Something's better than nothing, right? He finds more than that, though. He finds a full hairbrush. So he grabs all of the hair, and he hands it over to Roscoe to go get tested. Later in the day, Sean is once again trying to feed the youth of America, and Dorothy is asking if that's such a good idea or not. She feels like they're going to come back to him like stray cats. And in a way, she's right, because a little while later, they get a knock at the door from that same homeless teen who asks if it might be he, it might be non-binary, I don't know, but they want to use the bathroom. Sean, just trying to be nice, says, yeah, go ahead, it's over there. And the teen walks right by Leanne, giving her a quick glance as Leanne is holding Jericho. Dorothy ends up running into the teen as she's heading to work and freaks out because there's a stranger in her house. The teen ends up leaving, and Dorothy starts yelling at Sean for allowing any stranger into their home after what happened to them. She reminds him they could be casing the place, But Sean's convinced that it's nothing more than a troubled teen looking to use a bathroom. That's it. As Dorothy's yelling at him, though, she suddenly gets inspiration for a story. She calls up her news department and says, "Get everybody to my house, trust me." And she heads out to the park and tries to interview those kids, but they're not talking. She strikes out with the two that Sean had talked to, so she walks up to a third who's on a park bench and starts asking him questions about how he ended up like this, some of the challenges that he faces. And he tells Dorothy that he aged out of the system, and it's been tough because he wasn't able to find help, at least at first, not even for the heart problem. When he brings that up, though, the camera starts glitching. The cameraman brings up the fact that he lost it, and the kid just gets up and starts walking off. But that's when Sean walks in the park, and all three teens excitedly go up to him because they know, all right, free meal. And the news director tells Dorothy that's the story, the Good Samaritan bringing food to these kids. So instead of interviewing the kids, they interview Sean instead. Everybody comes over that night to watch the story. But as everybody's distracted watching it on television, Julian gets the DNA test results back. And Jericho and Dorothy are not a DNA match. Julian knows he needs to confront Dorothy about this. He sits her down and explains that he was there that day when Jericho died. And he wants to make sure that she keeps this child. He then pulls out a piece of paper and says, "I had yours and Jericho's DNA tested. Jericho isn't your baby." Dorothy, as usual, is in complete disbelief, just saying, "Of course Jericho is my baby." Dorothy now thinks that because of this weird conversation, Julian has relapsed. So he repeats, "Jericho is not your baby. This proves that." And while Julian is treating Dorothy like she's a fragile egg, Dorothy is doing the same thing to Julian because she's now convinced that he's using again. This awkward conversation gets interrupted when there's a knock at the door from one of the mothers from the previous day who forgot her diaper bag there. She shows up to pick it up, and that's when you find out that the hairbrush that Julian thought was Dorothy's is actually this woman's. So the DNA test didn't prove anything. He comes clean with Dorothy, and she scolds him, saying, "Don't ever do anything like that again." The whole time, Leanne is watching in the distance. Leanne then heads up to her room, starts playing the piano, but she gets a weird feeling. And when she looks outside, those three homeless teens are outside of her window just staring at her. Thank you so much for checking out this episode 3 recap of Servant. I really appreciate it. Consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you like this video. Smash that thumbs down button, though, if you thought it sucked. If you're looking for a recap of last season of Servant, I have that. I also have a recap of season 1 and 2 combined, so you can just get caught up with the entire show. You can check that out on my channel. Hopefully, you'll consider keep staying around and check out episode 4 when that drops next week, and then eventually the full season preview or recap. You know what? Hit thumbs down for this entire end credit screen. It sucks.